Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming and watching our video here. My name is Jill Siemens. I'm one of the school social workers for the division. Myself and the other social workers have done a few presentations for parents in the past, and one of which was on anxiety. Since we've had a few requests to record those, we decided to take the time to do it now. It's also a fitting time as anxiety can be high during COVID-19. So this presentation is not about COVID-19, but we might talk about it throughout, and it's very fitting for the time. So I will have the other ladies introduce themselves, and then we will carry on with the presentation.
Hello, I'm Melanie Bazin. Like Jill said, I'm another one of the school social workers for the Red River Valley School Division.
And hi, everyone. My name is Joanne Lariviere, and I am the 3rd Divisional Social Worker.
So in this session, we'll be talking about what anxiety is. So that'll be what it looks like, what it feels like, and how we sometimes mistake it for other things. We're going to talk a little bit about anxious feelings and the difference between feeling anxious and anxiety disorders. And then we're going to talk a bit about where anxiety can come from. There's lots of factors that can impact whether someone feels anxious or develops an anxiety disorder. So we'll talk about some of those. And then we'll end by talking about different strategies that we can use for ourselves or help our kids, and add some resources as well.
All right. So one of the things that we do know is that 1 in 8 children in Canada are severely struggling with anxiety, but there's only 20% of them that are actually getting help, which is quite unfortunate because anxiety is the most treatable of all mental health disorders. It does take quite a bit of, work and patience to get through, learning the strategies and such, but it is one of the most treatable disorders. It is also one that's hard to understand, especially if you've never experienced anxiety yourself. And so it's, we need to kind of be gentle and try to not be judgmental if somebody is experiencing anxiety. Some of the things that we might hear, is, well, why can't you just cheer up, or it's all in your head, or get some guts, just do it. You can do it. Life's too short to be sad or scared or fearful or any of the above things here. But for the person that's feeling the anxiety, it's really sometimes difficult to find the courage, to do the things that they're feeling worried and anxious about. So it's important just to be kind, gentle, and non-judgmental. And so this slide here kind of talks about mental illness. What if we treated all like kind of physical illnesses or disorders as we do mental illness? To kind of, suck it up. It's all in your head. So, I'm kind of getting very tired of this cancer of yours, or, I had to work overtime, but, or I wanted to work overtime, but I couldn't because, so-and-so had to go and get a heart attack. Like we don't do that. It's like we understand if somebody has asthma that they need their puffer. We're not telling them to just get over it and breathe. And we tend to do that when it comes to mental illness. It's all in your head. Just breathe. You got this. Like it's not, you shouldn't be so scared, or you shouldn't, feel that way. Now, when it comes to anxiety in children and youth, anxiety can look very different for different people, different circumstances, different situations. So some of the things that anxiety might come out or look like is just having irrational thoughts. I call them kind of thinking traps or thought patterns. It can look like avoiding places, situations, people, or things. If you've had, a situation or a place or a circumstance where you felt really anxious, you might find yourself maybe avoiding, not wanting to go there or talk to that person. Kind of just frozen, kind of just like deer in headlights look, and you're like, hey, what's going on? How come you're not saying anything? And that could just be the fear that just has them stuck. Appearing scared. So again, just that appearance of fearful, looking fearful. Signs in the body, so mind, feelings, and behaviors. So a lot of that kind of cognitive behavioral, so the thoughts, and then the things that we do. So we feel anxiety in our thoughts, the way that we think, the things that we do to maybe avoid, or to strategies that we do to that we can do to overcome, and also in our feelings there. So oftentimes it shows up in a negative thought pattern. So the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, or the what ifs, and all of that. And then imagining the worst. Oh, I'm going to fail my test, or I'm not good enough, or I should have done that. It shows up and it feels like tension and irritability. And then it can also show up as just kind of shutting down. So not talking, just avoiding, just kind of going in a corner there. So this is kind of a bit of a depiction of that panicky feeling and state that often accompanies feeling very worried or scared or fearful. And so it's really, like, as you can tell, this poor little guy, he's really uncomfortable, and it can come in all of these symptoms or a few, and a person experiencing this may feel, the restless kind of legs, that feel like their legs are jello, or their visions are getting blurry. And then another time it might show up as, their mind racing, feeling nauseous, really getting kind of sweaty, dizzy. And so it's not like one experience the experience that's always going to be there. But then this is kind of like a panic, a bit of like what anxiety feels like. And so you kind of feel out of control, and it's very uncomfortable and scary. And then sometimes, it can show up as something else. A lot of times anxiety can come out as behavior. And so it may look like, defiance, not listening. It might be like, I'm afraid, at bedtime, I don't want to go to bed, or difficulty sleeping, not staying asleep. It could be anger. It comes out as just being very, very angry and upset. And you're like, hey, you kind of went from 0 to 10 there, and I don't really know what happened. And the underlying kind of concern there might be, or feeling might be, anxiety related. Chandeliering is kind of, like I said, that 0 to 10 flying off the handle, like, whoa, what just happened there? Lack of focus. So, having trouble doing chores or getting their homework done, or even just not really listening. Avoidance is a big one. So we'll talk a little bit later about a little bit more about avoidance there, but that one's a tricky one, because it works really, really well with anxiety, because when you avoid, you feel better immediately, but in the long run, you actually find out that avoidance is the frenemy, as you're going to see here, to anxiety. And it can come out as over planning. So just like, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, everything's going to be neat and tidy. And but again, if the root of that kind of over planning is anxiety, that's not healthy for a child as well. And negativity. So, this sucks. It's not fun. I don't like it. I'm not good. I don't want to do it. So it can come out, as you can see, it can come out and show up as a lot of very different things. So it's important to be aware of what anxiety looks like, feels like, and may just present as in your child. So like I mentioned, so the frenemy of anxiety is avoidance. And so I kind of describe avoidance as a Band-Aid solution. So for example, I'm trying to think of an example here. If we don't want to go to bed. So if we have a little one that doesn't want to go to bed, and so they're avoiding bedtime, they want another glass of water, they want another hug, they want another, and it works because they're getting that comfort, right? But in the long run, they're not really learning how to maybe go to bed on their own, or to solve the kind of bedtime issue.
All right, so one of the things we hear when we're helping people with anxiety is that confusion around, but they were fine yesterday. Like last time we did this task, they were completely fine, and today they're not. So is it them, manipulating or creating this so that they can avoid the task or the situation? And that's just not what this is about. So It's not an excuse. It's not a manipulation. What's happening is that on that day, they just might not be able to handle that situation for a variety of reasons. Our window of tolerance can be impacted by factors that we might not notice, but we all kind of have bad days, right? So there's days where we can take on a bigger load of stress than other days. And that's the same with our children. So yeah, sometimes children will hold it together as long as they can, and then there's times that they can't. So feeling anxious versus being anxious. So we all feel anxiety at different times and at different levels. So for an example of like healthy or good at anxiety, if you're going for an interview and you're feeling anxious about it, that will likely push you to study, research, and do the best that you can to be successful in that interview. And then once that interview is done, usually the anxiety has subsided and you go about your normal life. So that's what we would call healthy anxiety. We all need it. That gets us out of bed, it gets us performing, and it gets us to do things. However, when anxiety is outside of our normal range, when we're feeling it almost every day, when it's not just situational, when it's taking us outside of our normal range, that might signal to us that we might need some help. So the types of actual disorders in the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual for mental illnesses, there's different types of anxiety disorders. There's separation anxiety disorder, general anxiety disorder, panic disorder, social anxiety. There's specific phobias. Now, obsessive compulsive disorder used to be under the anxiety disorders. However, it now has its own section. But we do talk about it because anxiety is a big part of that disorder. So this is what I was just mentioning, sorry, about when anxiety takes us out of our normal. When we're outside of our normal range of mental state and behavior, that might signal that it's a problem. So a problem is only a problem if it causes a problem. A mental health problem causes major changes in our thinking, emotional state, and behavior. A problem to one person may not be a problem to another. And like I said already, anxiety itself is not a problem. We all have different sensitivity levels. Our biological makeup is different. Our historical, experiential, and developmental factors are all different. And so these can all mean that we experience anxiety differently. And one person could develop an anxiety disorder and another one may not, even if with the same lived experiences. So where does anxiety come from? There's a lot of places where it can come from. So there's evolutionary causes for anxiety. If you've ever heard the term helicopter parenting, where parents hover over their child, making sure that they don't get hurt, what can happen with that is we're sort of teaching children that the world is unsafe, that you have to be afraid of what's out there. So that can sometimes teach us to be anxious in general. There's sometimes structural and functional changes in the brain that can cause anxiety. Genetics and family history, there's a link there. Past experiences, trauma, co-occurring disorders as well. So sometimes we'll see anxiety occur with another disorder. So it's common to see that. Attachment histories can also bring up some anxiety. Insecurities, environmental and societal factors. So right now we're talking about the COVID pandemic, and we're seeing a lot of anxiety around that. So for people that are already struggle with anxiety, you might see heightened anxiety during this time. Or you might see new developing anxiety during something such as a pandemic or a big change or times of uncertainty. So anxiety isn't weakness. Living with anxiety, turning up and doing stuff with anxiety takes a strength most will never know. So yeah, it's not that somebody's too weak that they can't face stresses in life. It's that, you know, they're trying their very best, and when they do overcome and learn coping strategies that can help them out, they're using a lot of strength.
So Mel talked about where anxiety can come from, and we often want to talk about what's happening in the brain. We are not brain experts, but understanding a bit about the brain can help us to understand why people are responding to a situation in a certain way and how we can then support them. So we start by sort of understanding the evolution designed brain. So I'll also use my hand as a bit of an example, and you'll see more of that in the next slide as well. But if my hand is the brain, then my arm would be the brain stem. So that's the reptilian brain. That's the part that develops the first, and it helps with all the functioning in our body that we don't have to think about. So our heart rate, perspiration, blood flow, that's all just happening, and that's a part of the reptilian brain. Then we have the limbic system, the middle, and our amygdala is in there. So we'll talk a bit about the amygdala. But the limbic system, a lot of our intense emotions are in there, and the amygdala in particular can be considered a bit of a alarm system. So it's looking out for danger, and we'll talk a bit more about that. And then we have the neocortex. This part develops the last, and actually it's still developing until we are in our mid-20s. So our kids don't have it fully developed. Even our older teenagers, that part of their brain isn't yet fully developed, and that's really important to understand when they're dealing with big emotions, and why they're not able to manage those emotions. Because this part of the brain, it's the part that we need to learn. It needs to be functioning for us to be able to have rational thought, to use logic, to use language, to problem solve. A lot of that is here, to have real conversations with people. So what happens, and I'll go to the next slide to show a bit of this. So the hand model of the brain is sometimes used to understand what it looks like when we flip our lid. So what happens is that this middle brain, part of its function is to keep us safe, and this is evolutionary. So most of the time, our prefrontal cortex and our limbic system are sort of connected, which means that we can regulate our feelings. If we have feelings, we can understand them logically, and we can calm ourselves, and we can sort of stay in control. But if something triggers our alarm system, then we do what you call flipping your lid, and we actually sort of lose the functioning of our prefrontal cortex. So one way that we often explain this is in a survival situation. So if a bear were to walk into the room, I wouldn't sit here looking at it, thinking about it. I wouldn't try to use logic and reason in this moment. I wouldn't think, oh, what kind of bear is that? How did it get in here? What is it looking for? What's my best strategy? None of that is happening, because by the time I've had any of those thoughts, I'm eaten. But instead what happens is our alarm system goes off. The amygdala notices it and says that's danger, and sends signals to our brainstem to just move, to just act. So that's those automatic processes. So this is what we talk about as the fight, flight, freeze response. So I see the bear and my alarm goes off. I flip my lid. I'm not thinking logically. I can't really listen or notice what's going on around me. My body's just reacting. So if it's flight, I might try to get out a different door. If I feel trapped, maybe I'm just going to fight. I'm going to try to hit that bear with whatever I can. And if I feel really hopeless or am just in shock, maybe I just freeze and I don't really do anything. So that's what is happening. And this can happen, this happens in us too. If anyone's ever had a panic attack, that's sort of what's happening. you can't logically think about what's happened. You can't convince yourself that you're safe because your body is just, something's been triggered to make your body think that you're in danger. And this happens with kids too. It can happen for different reasons. Kids who've experienced trauma, they flip their lid a lot quicker because maybe they have experienced danger, so they're kind of primed for it. And when the lid is flipped, we might see a kid freaking out, and what our tendency is to try to like talk to them to calm them down. But because that part of the brain that they need to actually listen to us and process what we're saying is not working, they can't hear us. So another analogy that I've heard is to understand the parts of the brain as different animals. So the prefrontal cortex is sort of like the owl. It's wise. It can pay attention to things and its surroundings. It knows what's going on, but it's that wise part of us. Then the amygdala is the meerkat. It's paying attention to what's going on. It's looking out for danger. And then the brainstem is sort of like the tiger. Most of the time, it's just sort of chilling. It's relaxed. But when the meerkat sees something that it thinks is dangerous, it wakes up that tiger. So the tiger is on, which scares away the owl, and we lose that wise mind. So that's a kind of another fun way to explain it to kids, to understand that if something has been triggered, that owl might be gone and they can't learn, they can't process information. So we need to be aware of that and then use different strategies. There's lots of great videos to explain this as well. So here, we're not going to show it. Normally in a presentation we would, but you can see that it's called Fight, Flight, Freeze, and it's anxiety explained for teens, I believe. I think there's also one for kids. These are great videos to actually show kids as well, to help understand what's going on in their brain when they're having these reactions. And sometimes we can also flip our lid for reasons that we don't even understand. So for one child that I work with has had a lot of attachment disruptions, like has felt very rejected by caregivers in the past, has felt sort of unstable, like they're not sure if their parent is going to stick around, if they're going to come visit, if they're going to follow through. So for this kid, when they feel a sense of rejection or a sense of loss, it might not even be a real rejection or loss, but if they sense that, that's enough of a trigger for them to flip their lid. So it might be something like a kid stole their pencil. And to us, it's very minor, but for that kid, it's a loss. Someone was taking something that was theirs, and that can be enough to flip their lid. And I mean, even for adults, people who've experienced trauma, if they were abused and their abuser wore a certain scent, if they might be passing someone in a mall and smell that scent, they have no idea that they even smelt it, but suddenly their brain is doing this and they're in a full panic attack. So we don't always recognize what it is, but it's just really important to understand that so that we can then help people who are dealing with that anxiety. So then we wanted to talk about some common approaches that may not help, things that we often try. And part of it is because we're trying to connect to their prefrontal cortex. We're trying to talk to them, and that's not going to work. So talking too much when dealing with a child who's dysregulated, who's having really big feelings. Telling someone to just get over it. To just focus on the positives in your life. I know that sometimes people really get tired of hearing that. And we do sometimes talk about gratitude too, and it's really good to foster gratitude, but that doesn't necessarily mean just looking on the sunny side and just notice all the positives, because you know, they do have a lot of very negative emotions, and it's important to acknowledge that as well. So minimizing the situation to say, oh, it's not a big deal. Instead, we might acknowledge that they feel anxious. Like, I recognize that this is hard for you, that you might feel scared. And I also believe that you can deal with it, and you can manage it. So sort of finding that balance with acknowledging it, acknowledging that the feeling is real, but also acknowledging that they can be courageous. It's not helpful to give ultimatums. That can often increase anxiety. Raising your voice. So being aware of our tone, our facial expression, our body language. When our lid is flipped, we can't necessarily, like, they can't hear the words that we're saying, but some messages still get through. So that tone of voice, that facial expression, some of that will still get through. So if our tone and our face appears angry, even a little bit, or frustrated, that's probably not going to help. We want to be mindful that to be soft, to be calm, to try to connect with the kid in a way that doesn't seem threatening. And it's also not helpful to constantly try to save children from the icky feelings. So we talked about avoidance earlier. Sometimes if a kid has a really strong emotional reaction, we just want to say to them, okay, it's fine, you don't have to do it. Like, we know this is so hard, and we want to just remove that feeling, but that's not going to help them build up resilience. Then the next time they have those feelings, they're going to run away from them again. And that's not helping them to be stronger. So we want to normalize those feelings. Like, I know this is really hard. I know this feels so terrible. But it's something that we all experience so that we don't reinforce that avoidance. And some other things that we can try, to create calm before having a conversation. So if their lid is flipped, maybe it's something that we do want to talk to them about, but we can't talk to them until their body is calmed down, until their lid has come back online, so we can actually have that conversation. So to figure out how to calm them, we'll talk about some calming strategies in a little bit. To acknowledge that anxiety is real and it is difficult. We don't always give into it. We want to fight against it, but those feelings are big and they're difficult, and we don't want to simplify that. So just a little quote here from Kids These Days by Dr. Jody Carrington. She's a great resource for parents as well. But the secret sauce is all about regulating first, before you try and teach. Connection before direction. So when kids feel quite anxious, whether they have an anxiety disorder or they just feel anxious for other reasons, sometimes it comes out in behavior. And our instinct can be to just redirect them right away. But this just emphasizes the need to regulate first. Connect with them in some way, acknowledge the feeling, help them to calm, and then maybe teach. Then give them the other options. It's not one or the other, but it's just regulating and connecting first. And this ties into the idea of brains reading brains. So this has been studied, but our brains actually we try to mirror each other. So if you're with someone and they are really aggressive and angry towards you and they maybe start to yell, you might feel like doing the same back to them, because we have these mirror neurons that are reading each other. But in the same way, if we see a kid who's flipping out, us being angry at them will probably just heighten their negative feelings, their dysregulation. But if we can work on keeping ourselves calm and actually being calm, maybe we need to quickly do something for ourselves, take a deep breath so that we can be a little bit calmer and come to them in that way, their brain, it might not be obvious and it might not be quick, but eventually their brain can start to mirror ours as well and can calm down just through that co-regulation. And then here are just some helpful tips, more about that connection, because this is such an important first step in dealing with anxiety. But to normalize, understand how common these problems and these feelings are. Empathy and acceptance. Understanding is very important in helping to manage anxiety. And understand that the anxiety is real. Validate the feeling. We can validate the feeling without validating some of the behaviors that come along with it. We can recognize that the anxiety is a real feeling, but we don't want them to avoid. We're not necessarily validating that kind of behavior, just as an example. And role modeling. So the brains read brains, right? Regulating ourselves so that we can teach our kids how to regulate. Maybe it's practicing our own coping strategies and showing our kids how to do that. if we deal with anxiety, it's so important for us to show our kids that we have to do things to manage it, and we have to take steps to work on it. So those are just some helpful tips to build that connection and reduce anxiety.
All right, so here are just some simple habits that help to reduce anxiety. So if we incorporate some of these in our day-to-day, it can help to manage those feelings. So one is exercise, eating healthy, getting enough sleep, connecting with people who feel safe, getting outside in nature, creating routines, and they don't have to be super strict routines that you're doing every minute the same every day, but just certain things that are sort of the same every day. So whether that be the bedtime routine or the morning routine, whatever it is, that just creates that something that you can expect. And then also making sure that there's time for play, and that's non-structured play, just letting kids be able to use their imagination, and kids actually work out a lot of their feelings and experiences through play. So it's very important. Being creative, being able to express ourselves, limiting social media, practicing relaxation strategies like mindfulness or deep breathing. Other ways that we can help. So there's gradual exposure to stressors. However, when we're doing this, it's small steps. It needs to be a goal that is agreed upon by both people that are working on this. So if, for example, if you're working on a fear of swimming with your child, you're not going to just throw them in the deep end right away. We might talk about it first, agree to the goal, agree to the steps towards the goals. So that could be, you know, first talking about what swimming would be like, what it would feel like. And then it could be, you know, dipping toes in. Maybe then next time is going up to the knees. And every step of the way, you know, agreeing to the next step and processing how that's feeling for them. Preparing for changes. So anytime that there's uncertainty or something different happening, making sure that we can tell our kids that this is going to be happening and that these are ways that we can prepare for it. Another way we can help is going with the worry. So we, as parents, we tend to reassure, and some of our kids that are feeling anxious might want a lot of reassurance. But when we're giving too much reassurance, we're sort of feeding into that fear or that anxiety that they have, right? So the more that we reassure, the more we're telling them, yeah, maybe there is a reason for you to seek out this reassurance that I'm giving to you. So it's good to try to balance some of that. One way to go with the worry is to maybe create a worry box or a worry time. So a time that's planned and specific for you to go over whatever your child's worry might be. And then talking it through, but only during that time, and trying not to make it before bedtime, because that could really spiral out of control and make them have a hard time sleeping. But so if we were to talk about, let's say a kid is afraid of a tornado, and instead of trying to avoid that worry, we spend time talking about it. So then we might want to acknowledge how that's feeling, look at how likely it is that this would be happening here. So really actually doing research and teaching them how to problem solve this question or this worry that they might have. Another way is supporting uncertainty. So in those times where there are changes or uncertain times, like with COVID-19 happening, just supporting a little extra support with our kids around those uncertainties that are happening and ways to cope. And we can, like Jill mentioned, if we model the ways that we're coping with things, our children learn a lot through how we do things. So that could be helpful for them. So also there's calming strategies. However, we wouldn't suggest that you pull out a mindfulness activity when somebody's in the middle of a panic attack, for example. That wouldn't be very helpful. So it's really good to practice these strategies when we're already in a calm place. And then when it becomes something that you're more used to doing, you can incorporate it in your daily activities, or you can start to use it as a coping mechanism once you're more familiar with it. But there's lots of mindfulness apps and activities that you can do. There's books. So there's also sensory toys that can help, because anxiety does live in our body. And so sometimes we need to use sensory tools to kind of get that out of our system, out of our body. So whether that be fidget tools, weighted blankets can really help for nighttime. Sometimes a lap animal or a stuffed toy. There's a lot of different things that we use in schools that can also be used at home. I would suggest consulting with a professional, especially with weighted blankets and that kind of thing, just to make sure that you're using the right ones. Deep breathing exercises. So there's a lot of videos that you can find on these. There's a lot of resources online. You can use bubbles. I think we will be showing you a hand breathing exercise later on. Calming music. There's also Go Noodle videos on YouTube that are really awesome, and there's a lot of good ones. In this presentation, we have one called Melting. That's really good. We're not going to show it, but it will be in the resources section. There's also progressive muscle relaxation, which is when you do sort of a head to toe muscle tension and then release. And it really helps your body to just let go of some of that tension that we sometimes hold on to. So here's that Go Noodle melting video that I just talked about, but that will be in our resources section.
So similar to the calming strategies, we also often use what we call grounding strategies. So like I talked about before, when the brain is sounding the alarm, we sometimes need to shift it, to turn it off. So if we flipped our lid, that alarm is going off, maybe fully, maybe someone's in fight, flight, freeze, or even if they're just feeling anxious but haven't fully flipped their lid, grounding exercises can really help to shift the brain and to calm the body as well. So when this is happening, our amygdala is activated. So grounding strategies can actually like force us to use a different part of the brain to shift the attention away from that alarm in a way. So it can sort of soften those intense emotions. So some examples might be distraction. Often the examples, the different things that we use are related to our senses. Because we can't necessarily use our thinking brain. We can't do something that requires a lot of thought, but just bringing our attention to our senses. So maybe it's just feeling our feet on the ground. Maybe it is using a sensory tool. A common one as well is the 5-4-3-2-1 strategy. So basically, this is bringing our attention to all 5 senses. So we might ask the child to name 5 things in the room that they can see, 4 things that they can physically feel. So maybe the floor under our feet, maybe the chair on our back. 3 things that we can hear, 2 things that we can smell, and 1 thing we can taste. So obviously those last ones are very difficult, and you can use variations. You can just stick with things that you can see, things you can feel, things you can hear, and just go through that a few times, and that can really slow some of those physical reactions and shift our brain to calm us down. You could also name all the things in the room that are blue, because it just forces them to focus on something else, to get them to count backwards. Depending on their age, maybe they're just counting backwards from 10, maybe they're counting backwards from 100 in intervals of 3, but it really forces your brain to shift to something else. And if you want more examples of grounding exercises, you can let us know as well. So Mel had mentioned briefly the hand breathing, but this is a really great way of of grounding someone, of calming them, but also a way of connection, and it incorporates physical touch. So normally we would do this in person. So I would have someone to do the example with me, but hopefully you can see my hands. We'll say that this one is me and this one is a child that I'm trying to calm. So the kid is like flipping their lid. And hopefully this is something we've practiced in the past, because if it's not, I might not be able to get the kid to buy into what I'm doing. But hopefully if the kid has some prior knowledge of this strategy, they'll be able to do it with me. So what you do is you would get the child to put their hand on top of yours and then breathe with you. So then you would ask them, tell them to look at your hands and to keep watching their hands as you breathe in and out. So as you breathe in, we lift the hands up, and breathe out, you lift it down or lower it down. And then you do that a few times as you breathe in and out. So you have the physical touch, which can be calming. You also are able to pace the breathing, because sometimes if we tell people to breathe, maybe they're breathing deeply, but they might be doing it really fast, and that's not going to be helpful. So this way we can help them to breathe slowly, which is one way of helping to calm some of that anxiety. So that is just one strategy that you can teach to your kids when they're calm. Practice it, just do it sort of for fun or to connect. And then in those moments when they are feeling anxious, hopefully you can use it to then calm.
And another very important kind of first step to anything that we do with our children relating to kind of mental health or, their feelings, their, all of that is just to recognize what's going on in their minds and in their bodies. And we have a little outline there. It's like the little gingerbread person there. And so that's kind of like a little tool that you can use with your own child, just drawn, putting it on paper, just to kind of start recognizing what emotions they're feeling and where they're feeling it in their body. How do you know you're sad? How do you know you're mad? What does it look like in your, how do you feel? Where do you feel it? Does your heart go faster? And so they can color it in. And then naming emotions. So, are you irritated, frustrated, mad, sad, glad? So those are kind of the basic ones, but are you embarrassed? And then just recognizing, again, where do you feel it in your body? And so children can't regulate their emotions if they can't first recognize their emotions and how to identify these feelings and where they're feeling it in their body. They might just react to an uncomfortable feeling that they're feeling without really knowing what's really going on. And that speaks very true to anxiety and worries and fear. And again, it also requires the adults to have that emotional awareness. So, because kids can very quickly kind of feed off our emotions, even if if we're unaware of them. So if we're kind of feeling, I'm sure all of us parents have had those moments where we're rushing out the door and we're like, hey, let's go. And the kids are actually moving slower, or maybe they start fighting or whatever. And we're like, what's going on? And it could just be that we're just kind of feeding off those kind of emotions and tension and physical sensations, right? So it's good for us to acknowledge and to be aware of what's going on for us, because our children do sense that. And so there's really another strategy is using scaling questions. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, the most afraid you've ever been in your life, where are you feeling in this situation right now? They may be like, well, I'm at an 8, so then you might do that hand breathing or some other strategies, and then go back and say, okay, well, where is it now? And then how do you know where is it change in your body? What are you feeling differently? Just kind of being curious just being curious and doing these activities with your child will really, again, help raise their awareness, and can be used as regular check-ins too. How's it going? I'm fine. I'm fine. Okay, let's take a moment here and just, how do we know we're fine? Well, actually my hands, I just can't stop moving my hands. Oh, well, what could that mean? So just, again, we're playing detective and we're exploring with our kids. Another important piece of, when it comes to anxiety is making sure we're externalizing it. You are not anxiety. Nobody is, I am Joanne. and I may have anxiety. I may struggle with anxiety. I may dislike, some of my anxieties sometimes, but I am not anxiety. And so ways to externalizing is like kind of giving it a name, drawing it out. So, the worry monster or Bob or whatever, and then talk about how it impacts the child. So, how does it trick you? Are there ways that, anxiety is kind of tricking you right now? Are there ways that what are ways that you can kind of fight it or defeat it? And then again, challenging or helping the kids remind themselves of, well, it really helps when I go outside and I look at what can I see or what can I feel, or having a cold drink of water or whatever, right? So another one here might be those cognitions, right? So I'm going to mess up, they're going to laugh at me, I can't cope. So recognizing that that's the externalized anxiety, that's the anxiety that's kind of playing mind tricks on you. And then so one way to kind of counteract that is creating some positive affirmations, positive things that you can write down. That can be a separate activity. So it can be like, it's going to be okay. I can handle this. I've played soccer before. I know I'm nervous before a game, but I know I can do it. I'm going to do my best. That's all I can do. Those types of things. You can do kind of thought journal. So really journaling moods and try to figure out what works because a lot of these strategies takes trial and error and time. And one of my colleagues here mentioned that we need to practice these ideally when we're not anxious. So then they're going to come more easily when we are in situations when we're feeling nervous. And so again, so that's externalizing anxiety. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just the foundations of, I think, all of us, right? So we are resilient beings. We strive for confidence and we all have grit. And so the negative type of anxiety, what it does is it kicks down confidence, right? So it can make us or our children feel kind of powerless and out of control. And so it's important to kind of build up on that confidence. And that can be done. I love exploring with children, like, what do you love to do? What are you good at? So try to find, I think everybody needs to find something that they feel really good at, and to kind of have that on the back burner where they're having a bad day, right? Okay, well, I'm really good at that, right? And kids love being good at and being reminded that they're really good at, baking or coloring or running or whatever it may be, right? So confidence just automatically just builds up an individual, but also kind of counteracts anxiety. And then grit is just the ability to see long-term goals and achieve them despite the obstacles, which kind of fits into the resiliency. So even though we get kind of, we may fail or we may not, get the results that we want, just to give up and to stick to it, stick with it. And then ultimately we see that we get better and better, or we may be able to overcome it. And also resiliency kind of gives the child a better sense of control over their own body, right? And their own minds and their own, just their own being ultimately. So knowing that they've maybe failed at something, or that they got through something really, really, really difficult that at the time they really honestly didn't think that they could do it. What that does is it just builds them up. And again, the more they build up, the more confidence they have, and the better ability that they have to overcome situations where they may be faced with fear and anxiety. And I forgot to mention the other slide there, but it's really important to just really celebrate those small successes and bravery. So it doesn't matter what it is. If it's one small step towards, being braver or a little bit more confident, or if you see your child pushing themselves just a teeny tiny bit, just really make sure that we're letting them know that we noticed that they made a really good effort and we saw them try. So these are just really nice. I think we like to hear stuff like this too as adults, right? So you know what? 10 positive phrases that kids want to hear today. So I learned something from you today. Thanks for teaching me that. I didn't know that. Look at that. You're teaching me and I'm the adult here. That's great. I think about you when we were apart. I missed you today. I was wondering how you were doing in gym class, or I was wondering how you were doing during math or whatever. I enjoy listening to your stories. Thanks for sharing that story with me. That was really interesting. Your mistakes are fine with me. We make mistakes. We're human. We're kind of supposed to be making mistakes because that's how we learn. And I'm okay with yours. I love spending time with you. I love coloring. I love when you teach me something. I love watching you play. Wow, that was so awesome. Like, you tried something new on the trampoline today. You can swing so high. I love being your parent. I love being your mom, your dad, your parent. I'm so happy that you're my kid. I know you can do it. I know sometimes you might not, you might have trouble believing yourself in yourself, but I know that you can do it. You make me smile, right? You make me just so proud. And yeah, the other one, I'm proud of you. That's a big one. I'm proud of you. And actually, when we say those statements, when our children are not perfect, right? They're not doing things exactly like we, would like them to do or whatever, but they're doing their best. And we're saying that, again, that's building that confidence, that resiliency.
All right. Sorry, my dog was barking, so I had to wait a second. So we have to talk about self-care for sure. Parenting and caregiving is tough, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. So we have a bit of a section on that. But first of all, if you're personally living with anxiety, it might be helpful for your child to see you working on that for yourself and modeling how you're getting through that. That's huge for them, because if they see you doing it, they're going to want to do it too. And self-care is for sure important. You can't pour from an empty cup. And so what are ways that you recharge and take care of yourself? And I know that we're all busy and sometimes it feels impossible to do some of this. But on our website, our RRVSD parent website, there's lots of tips for busy parents on there. And there will be a link to that in our presentation. It's not selfish to refill your own cup so that you can pour into others. It's not a luxury, it's essential. So we do have to, again, it's good modeling for our children too, that we also have to take care of ourselves, and it's a good thing to do. So here are intervention options and resources. So there's counseling, talk therapy, CBT, DBT, solution focus. There's all kinds of therapies. There's art therapy, animal assisted therapy. I know in our communities there are animal assisted therapists that we can, point you to. There's medications, there's groups. Sometimes you can do a combination. So really, professionals do recommend that you do combination of medication and counseling of some kind, which will be more efficient. There's also crisis response services and crisis stabilization units. There's also, if you're needing rapid assessment, you can see your medical doctor and request that if you're needing help right away. And there's other resources as well in your schools. There's your guidance counselors. There's ourselves, or the social work clinicians, psychologists, and occupational therapists. And so you can always ask to work with any of us. We have community resources such as community mental health, and again, the crisis numbers there. There's apps, which I think we had mentioned before. These are just a few of them: Mindshift, Calm in the Storm, Headspace, and Smiling Mind, which will be in our resources section. And there's a bunch of websites: the Canadian Mental Health Association, Anxiety Disorders Association of Manitoba. There's Anxiety BC, which I think the name has actually changed on that one, but there's also Manitoba Psychological Society, Mindfulness-based stress reduction, Mood Gym. Yeah, and then to end, we did mention our RRVSD parent website. Every day it's updated with daily posts There's information on topics like anxiety, depression, parenting, and more. So check that out. And there's also a contact us section on that website. So if you ever needed to get a hold of us, you are free to do that. So I think that's all we have for our presentation. Like I said, there will be a resources section sort of beside this presentation alongside with it so that you can access the websites and the resources that we had mentioned. But thanks for checking this presentation out, and stay well.